Hi there. Welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast with Lisa Schlossberg. I'm your host, Lisa Schlossberg, a licensed social worker, certified health coach, personal trainer, and yoga instructor. If you, like I have, struggle with your relationship with food, eating, and body image, I am here with this podcast to guide you into healing the relationship you have with yourself through a trauma-informed, holistic, and mind-body-soul approach. Together, we can support you in building a lifestyle of more peace, freedom, safety, and power. Hello, and welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast. This is me, your host, Lisa Schlossberg, and we are back today for solo series number 36. 36! Whoa. All right, so I'm over here settled. Neville has made himself into a ball on my lap, so we're ready. That means it's go time. I think I really just want to dive in because the visual that I had this morning about myself and my thoughts is, when a magician pulls the thing out of the hat and it just keeps going and going and going and going and going. And maybe you're sitting there like, surely this has to end at some point, and then it just doesn't. That's how I feel about my thoughts, and there's just so much to say. So anyway, I'm not taking up any time introducing anything. Let's just get into it. All right. The first thing that I want to follow up on, I have a couple follow-up thoughts. Everything I'm about to say feels important. When we're talking about the relationship you have with yourself and the way that you react or respond to yourself when you do something that pisses you off, or how you respond, right? I gave the example of I left the freezer open and Patricia so gently and with so much kindness and slowness came and told me about that, right? I want to talk a little bit more about how this shows up in the relationship with ourselves, because you're constantly going to be doing stuff that pisses yourself off, if you're anything like me anyway, and we need to be skilled at meeting that experience in such a way so that we can do things like, and I'll wrap this up by saying, I will come back to this idea, what Kristen Neff says about self-compassion being the tenderness is what maintains connection when you're doing something fierce like setting a boundary. So if you want to maintain safety in the relationship you have with yourself, which is the foundation to something like sustainable weight loss, then it is necessary for you to not just do it when things, I don't know that it's ever really easy, especially in the beginning, but when things get really hard and challenging, like these moments. So what I want to say about it is what you want to hold on to and what you can practice is being in a space where you can acknowledge, and I know I said this a little bit, but I want to, again, just create a little bit more space for it. I can acknowledge that I am mad or upset or disappointed, frustrated, whatever it is. I am mad about a thing that I've done. I am mad, and now let's put this in the relational context, me in a relationship with myself. I did a thing, and I am mad that I did it, or I'm mad about the consequences of it. So if I use the example of, if I left my own freezer door open and there was a big puddle of water because all the ice melted on the floor the next morning, I would be mad about that. But here's now, if I use myself, what is important about this is being able to say, yes, I am mad. Okay. We don't have to shy away from that. We don't have to deny that. We don't have to pretend about that. Yes, I am angry. I am angry at the situation. I am angry at my behavior. I'm angry at the consequences of what I chose to do. And this is something, by the way, that is a mistake, which makes it a little bit easier to be like, okay, I didn't mean to do that. Sometimes you're mad about the thing that you very consciously chose to do. Either way, it actually doesn't matter. What I'm saying here is very often We have a lot of fear of anger, and we make a lot of meaning of anger. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that. But because of those things, there's a tendency to deny and pretend, oh no, I'm not mad. Or like, I think about, it has been such a practice for me that when someone apologizes, someone says sorry for something that I think they have every reason to apologize for, I have practiced, and it's not comfortable still, but I've gotten better at it. My response to the sorry being thank you. Think about the culture. A lot of us are sorry, it's okay. It's okay. Right? This kind of dismissal of my own experience. Actually, it's not okay. And thank you for recognizing that and owning that and taking responsibility for that, holding yourself accountable and apologizing. And so there's this dance we do around anger because it can feel unsafe and we're afraid of it and we make meaning of it. But that's why I think it's so important to highlight this. That is, you have to be able to say, I am mad. Yes, I am mad that you did that thing. And I am mad that I now have to clean up the mess of it. I am mad. And here's the part that's even more important. And just because I am mad about the thing that you did and the mess I feel I now have to clean up does not mean that I love you any less. Period. I am mad, but that doesn't mean anything about how I feel about you. And that is a really important distinction that you need to be clear about in your own system with yourself. And that's what this, where this goes. Because ultimately what you're doing there is saying, just because I'm angry or just because I'm having an emotional reaction to the thing that you just did does not mean that you are any less safe with me. My anger has a place. My anger is valid. And it doesn't mean anything about our relationship or how I'm going to relate to you. And that's where, again, I think it's very related to and kind of building on this idea that there's a distinction between shame and guilt. Because guilt, again, is more about the behavior. Shame is about the person, the making meaning of it. And so if I know that there's a difference between, yes, I'm angry at a thing that you did, that's very different than all my anger is being channeled at you, because that can feel scary. And I'll just add, I had a really emotional experience of this with myself recently. And I will actually definitely be saying more about that on the Patreon. But what I want to share here about it is that even in that moment, what I noticed and heard were the parts of me, like the younger parts of me, that were saying things like, I didn't know, or, I wasn't thinking, or it just didn't occur to me. And I was able to sit in that space with that part of me that felt so guilty about some things that I've done to myself. And I was able to acknowledge the innocence. That's going to be a theme of this episode. The innocence. I know you weren't thinking. I know you weren't paying attention. I know it didn't occur to you. That's not your fault. And I'm still upset that I have to deal with this. I'm still grieving that this is where I find myself because you weren't thinking. And we can share that space together. The part of me that said, I just didn't know any better. And the part of me that says, yeah, and I'm still pissed off that I'm in this situation because you very innocently didn't know better. And it doesn't mean anything about you. It doesn't mean anything about how I feel about you. But I can acknowledge that this is the truth of how I feel. And that's okay. All of it gets to be here. And this is very often what is not happening in our internal system, which again is why I'm putting this on your radar. Now, all of that being said, another thing I want you to consider is when it comes to specifically anger, thinking about how you experienced anger when you were a kid. How did anger show up maybe with your parents, in your house? What is the family, experience and relationship with something like anger? Because even if your parents, for example, did not come right out and say, I don't love you anymore, or I'm so mad that you are no longer lovable, something like that. Even if you didn't get that message directly, which some people did, some of the time our experience with anger is, because we're children, we make meaning of it. And so if I feel like, for example, my mom is mad because of something I did, I might internalize that as my mom no longer loves me because of what I did. Okay, which is why, and again, it doesn't need to be spoken, but if I feel that way, my perception is my reality, and the meaning that I've made of it becomes where I live with it. So a lot of the meaning that a lot of us have made of being in a relationship with someone who feels maybe angry at us, we have kind of perpetuated the story that because this person is mad at me means they no longer love me. And that is something, again, you want to wake up to, because if you're in a relationship with yourself, you want to be really clear that just because you're mad doesn't mean you're unlovable. It just means you're mad and you're lovable. And those are two different things, right? So that's the first thing. But the other thing is, if your experience of anger in the past felt unsafe, that's the other thing to pay attention to. Because again, it may not be that it felt like you were no longer lovable. It might have felt like you are no longer safe. And however, again, you internalize that or whatever meaning you make of that, if the experience that you used to have with anger is that your parent figure maybe got explosive or unpredictable, or they reacted in their own, again, kind of fear stress response, if they went into their own fight or flight, that has an effect on your nervous system as the child. And so again, maybe you didn't make any meaning of it. Maybe it didn't feel like you were unlovable, but it did feel like if you did something that made someone else angry, it threatened your safety. That's another thing you want to pay attention to now, because if every time you do something that pisses you off, now your internal experience of that is that you are no longer lovable or that you are no longer safe, that's going to be an obstacle. Because as you proceed with something like intentional weight loss, and you have to be thinking very intentionally about the way you're behaving and the choices and the decisions that you make, every once in a while, you're going to behave in a way that's not in alignment with your values and your goals. And that's okay. But all of this is an opportunity to practice reparenting around that, so you can have the internal infrastructure around anger that says, we can maintain connection, I still love you, and you are still safe with me. And at the same time, I get to keep my anger because my emotional reaction is valid. So the last thing I'm going to say about that is, like I just said, we are reparenting. So we're introducing a new model that is, I can be mad and I still love you. I can be mad and you're still safe, okay? So the important thing to understand about all of this is that we're not just reparenting or creating a different relationship with something like anger or frustration or disappointment, things like that, but also just in a general context when it comes to the relationship you have with yourself. What we're doing with this is saying conflict is safe. Tension is safe. The rupture in a relationship is safe. And so this idea, a lot of us, again, have the belief that a quote unquote healthy relationship is one that lacks rupture. But that's not the case. The truth is that it's not about the presence of rupture. It's about the it's not about the absence of rupture. It's about the presence of repair. Okay. So it's about those moments. A stronger, healthier relationship is when you can get into conflict, when you can be in tension together and still remain connected. And maybe you take a break to regulate yourself, but in general, you come back stronger and stronger because you went through conflict and tension. So it's the same thing internally, where it's not about the absence of rupture. It's not about doing everything perfectly and making yourself feel good all the time. Sometimes you're going to, again, behave in a way that you're not proud of, but it's not about the absence of rupture. It's about the presence of repair. And so if you can say, yeah, all right, I'm pissed off, and also it's okay, I still love you. That's what we're going for. And again, you want to be really clear on how that works with yourself, because if you are setting yourself up with the expectation that, you can never be upset, angry, or disappointed at yourself, I don't think you're going to get very far, because that's not allowing you to be human at all. So we need space for this. We need space for rupture, knowing that repair is really, what we're going for. And it reminds me also of, safety and healing is not about the absence of threat or the absence of perceived threat, but it's about the presence of connection. Safety is not about the absence of threat. It's about the presence of connection. And so all of this is to say, it's not about not feeling what you're feeling. It's about allowing yourself to feel what you feel while remaining connected and loving towards yourself. Okay, now, having said that, the other thing I want to add to this is when I talk about, I gave the example of leaving things behind and not taking them. And again, I think it speaks to the internalized codependent relationship we have with ourselves. And clearly, I think all of this is kind of on the same theme. But when I talk about the third party, I'm either going to call it a third party if it's a scenario where, you're, like I said in the last episode, like calling a friend and it's an actual third party. And sometimes as I was listening to it, I was thinking it's just a third space, right? Where I talked about, like, if I'm taking someone's perfectionism from them and I think about it as like a box of perfectionism, and then I just leave it on the floor and walk away. There's a third space, the floor. It's not that person's responsibility or burden to carry any longer, and it certainly isn't mine either, and there's a third space. So what I was thinking also as I was listening to it is it reminds me of, I know this comes up a lot in like the 12-step programs, give it to God. Like, give it to God. If you are anxious, if you don't know, how things are going to unfold and you're trying to control everything you don't have control over, give it to God. And as we've at this point talked about many times, God can mean a lot of different things. There's no right or wrong, perception of what that is. But the idea of give it away, like energetically release it. And when it comes to something like the energy of anger and frustration and disappointment, I think that if that resonates with you, that's where I would kind of plug it in. This idea of give it to God. You're so angry, you're so frustrated, the energy of it. And maybe you don't have a friend to call in that moment. Give it to God. Give it to the universe. Hand it off. Hand it over. Breathe through it and release it. And the important thing to me about this, okay, is that it's not in a spiritually bypassing kind of way. It's not like a give it to God, don't feel your feelings, because I think that very often is what happens with a message like this. It can become, I don't want to feel this, I'm giving it away. But this is more of a, I acknowledge that I'm feeling this. I accept that I'm feeling this. I am allowing myself to move through the emotional, energetic experience of feeling this. And then I release it, because I don't need to be holding on to this energy when I go to have a conversation with this person that I am upset with or something, right? It's the idea of self-regulating so that you can be a safe presence in relationship. And if it works for you to think, give it to God as your third party, your third space, then take that, then use that. Okay, I lied. This is really the last thing I'm going to say about this point. That is, because what we're dealing with is energy, which is why it can work to feel like you are giving it to God. Or, okay, two more things. I'm thinking of specifically a coaching session I had years ago with a guy. I don't even know how to describe to you what kind of energy healing work we were doing. But I remember having a moment where we were specifically talking about the trauma and grief of my childhood. And I noticed that what kept coming up for me was that I felt angry at God, the universe, whatever. And the reason I'm telling you this is because it felt like such a huge breakthrough when he gave me permission to be angry at God or at, again, whatever, higher power. Because from, like I just said, not from like a spiritually bypassing kind of place, because I, at a point, was under the impression that like all spirituality was like light and fluffy and that anger at God did not belong or wasn't allowed, which again is like so fascinating to me because it's like my relationship with quote unquote God or the universe or whatever can really feel like a mirror to my relationship with like my actual parents, where it was like, I think a lot of us as kids, we don't feel safe or we don't have permission to say, I'm mad at you as the parent. I as the child, I am mad at you. That's not a feeling that a lot of us have space for. And so it can feel like when you get angry about something and you don't want to turn it inward and blame yourself or, be critical, judgmental, rude, mean, harsh to yourself, it can feel like, well, where does it go then? Because it can feel sometimes, if again, you're anything like me, like the option of just being angry at the universe and the way of things doesn't feel like an option. What I'm saying to you is, it is. It is. It's okay. It's okay to release it into, that realm energetically. So if you need permission to feel angry at, again, whatever higher power, feel that way. That's okay. Give it to God. Okay. Now, the actual last thing I'm going to say, because I want to bring this into your body. Okay. So just like so many of the things that we have talked about here, you might understand this conceptually in your mind, but it's way more supportive, effective, integrated when it also relates to how you're showing up in your body. So I just want to tell you about a session I had with a client this last week where it came up where she was feeling a feeling, and that feeling, that emotion, was related to a sensation in her body. And when I asked her how she was kind of responding or reacting to it, and I think this is something that happens very often, you feel a way, and then you feel a way about the way you feel. So what I asked her, and I think I will just acknowledge, I think this is a fairly like advanced practice, but what I asked her was if she could feel in her body, allowing herself to be frustrated about the feeling while simultaneously surrendering to it. And she was able to feel both at the same time, the frustration about the feeling and surrendering into it, relaxing into it, allowing her body to experience it. And it reminds me of, episodes ago when I introduced this idea of being alert and relaxed at the same time. Again, I think a lot of us have been taught directly or indirectly that if you are in a place of frustration about something, you can't also surrender to it or be in acceptance of it. Or that if you are surrendering to something, it means that you don't have any feelings about it. And what I'm saying to you is you can have both at the same time. You can be angry and you can be surrendering. and accepting. And this goes back to a conversation we had a long time ago about radical acceptance. So just bringing it all together, this is the idea of you don't have to like it, you don't have to want it in order to accept it. And the same is true in your body on an energetic level. It's now about saying, can you hold the energy of frustration and the energy of acceptance simultaneously? That's the goal. All right. Now, having said all of those things, shifting a little bit, another thing I want to come back to is the idea of connecting your behaviors to your values and having intention behind what you're doing. Because as I've said to you before, some of the time you're going to get uncomfortable. And especially when you're in those uncomfortable moments, you want to know why you're doing what you're doing. Why are you choosing this? Why are you forcing yourself to be so uncomfortable? Because if you know where you're headed, and this is just a step on the journey on the way there, you can be on board. You can be on your own team. A lot easier anyway. So the reason I'm coming back to this is because when I was talking to you about the Venn diagram, and there's the example that I used of appetite suppressants. And I talked a little bit about how there are a lot of people now, GLP-1 culture, on appetite suppressants because that is the intention is, right, it doesn't burn fat by itself. It supports you in eating less. So you're in a calorie deficit, so weight loss happens. So the reason I want to come back to this is because it's not just about appetite suppressants. And it also is not about, I mean, especially something like GLP-1s, but even beyond that, it's representing this idea that nothing about this is really good or bad or right or wrong or should or shouldn't. It's about where do you want to go? What's your end goal? And are the decisions you're making now aligned with that? And if your end goal is to, and I'll say more about this, be, for example, on a GLP-1 forever, and you want to live on an appetite suppressant, then you being on a GLP-1 and being on an appetite suppressant is directly aligned with that goal. And so, sure, great, cool. And again, I'll swing back around to the GLP-1 conversation. But again, it's about this idea of if we're not judging good, bad, right, wrong, then what we need is discernment around, is this aligned with where I want to go? And so beyond just the appetite suppressants, the other things that I thought of are the scale and just weight loss in general. But I thought about the scale specifically because this is another thing that is so bio-individual and something, as I've discussed with you, I think can come in seasons. Different seasons of our life, we're going to have different relationships with things like appetite or the scale. And so I think about, at a certain point, I was weighing myself definitely every single day, and at a certain point, multiple times a day. And then when I was starting to kind of reevaluate my priorities and think more about recovery and health and holistic healing than just the number on the scale, I struggled to tell the truth about this. But I realized, if I want to eventually one day, long term, get to a point where I don't wake up and weigh myself because I don't need to, because I feel so free and at peace with my body and myself, my dream was not getting on the scale and having like no relationship with the scale. And then I had to be honest with myself that if that's what I wanted long term, then it doesn't make any sense for me to be getting on the scale every single day short term, because all I'm doing is like kicking the can down the curb. I'm not actually aligning my behaviors in the short term with where I want to be in the long term. There's a mismatch there. And again, it's not about good or bad or right or wrong. It was just about the fact that it was like, wait, if I don't want to be stepping on the scale in the future, then at some point I'm going to have to get off of it. And I remember the same exact thing being true with like counting calories. It was like, if I want to live my life long term, one day, free from counting every calorie I eat, then it doesn't make sense. It doesn't align for me to continue counting every calorie I eat. And this, I remember the same thing now, all of it's coming to me. I remember the same thing being true about exercise, where it was like, I'm scared to take a day off. I'm scared to take a rest day. Okay, well, if I want to live a life where I feel safe to take a rest day, then I have to start doing that now. It doesn't make any sense for me to do, work out every single day, which I should have never been doing anyway. But it's like, if I wanted those things to change at some point, I had to be the one. And this is why it's more about like waking up and realizing that you are co-creating your life. You have power, you have choice, you have responsibility, because it was like, my experience of it was this kind of like, well, I do want to experience life without the scale. I do want to experience life without calorie counting everything. I do want to experience life with rest days. Yeah, well, at some point, someone will come along and make that happen, right? That whole like waiting for someone to save me was showing up, where it was a way of just not having to kind of force myself into the discomfort of the behavior change that I needed to move through if I wanted my life to look the way I wanted my life to look. So what I'm saying is, again, it's important to understand why you're choosing what you're choosing, because if you know, because I had to know in the moments where I was terrified to not get on the scale. I had to know in the moments where I was terrified to take a day off from exercise, where I was terrified to not be counting every calorie. I had to have in my mind that the reason I'm doing this is because the freedom and the peace and the lifestyle I want to live, that will be the result of showing up for this behavior change over and over and over again until it finally feels safe. Because the only way to get there is to get there. The only way out is through. Okay, now, this is also not exactly where I thought all of this would be going, but as I was saying, there's so many thoughts. So I want to sidebar and talk a little bit about the GLP-1 conversation, because I don't want to leave you hanging, and then I'm going to come back around. So what I want to say about the GLP-1 thing, and this is the tip of the iceberg, but we're not getting into this whole thing. I've shared a little bit about how I feel about it, but specifically when it comes to something like this, when I'm talking about appetite suppressant, things like that, I think what I've seen, and I shared this on Instagram in a reel a few months ago, what I've seen are a few different things, but I classified into like kind of 3 different categories, maybe. Group number 1 of people are people who are saying, I'm going on a GLP-1 and I know that this is a lifelong thing for me. I'm going to be on a GLP-1 for the rest of my life. And the reason for that is because a GLP-1, by the way, and this is not like a personal opinion. This is just what we know from all of the science, research, data, studies. This is not coming from me, is that they operate very much like kind of a diet approach, in that, again, it's not really doing anything magical when it comes to the food, the eating. What it's doing is suppressing the appetite so that you don't eat into a caloric surplus. You eat in a calorie deficit, and that's the mechanism of how it functions. But the reason that it is like the diet approach is because it's like other things that work while you're on them and then stop working when you're off of them. And so category 1 of people that I'm talking about will say, okay, well, if I need to be on this for it to work for the rest of my life, then I'm going to be on it so it works for the rest of my life. Period. The end. And again, not about good or bad, not about right or wrong. There's no judgment here about it. It's just, okay, you are clear on why you're doing what you're doing, your intention and your long-term vision for yourself, and all of those are in alignment. Cool. Do you? Then there's another group of people that I've seen where they say, okay, I want to go on a GLP-1 knowing that I want this to be temporary. And because I don't want to be on a GLP-1 for the rest of my life, again, not good or bad, not right or wrong, but because I, in group number 2, do not want to be on a GLP-1 for the rest of my life, what I want to do is use the GLP-1 as a tool as we've talked about on this podcast before, use it as a tool to bring some of that food noise down, which is what I need to come back to. I want to bring some of the food noise down, get kind of some support, this kind of jump start on helping me eat in a calorie deficit, helping me think straight around food, help me, feel more safe and grounded to actually pursue something like intentional weight loss. And while I'm doing that, while I'm exploring and experimenting with using a GLP-1 in a temporary sense, I'm going to use this window of opportunity where the volume on the food noise is turned down for me to be mindful about what I'm eating. How am I actually feeding myself? What is my exercise routine like? Do I hydrate my body? Do I get enough rest? How do my hormones function? If I'm using the GLP-1 as a tool, I think of it, my mind always goes to like training wheels. Like there's nothing wrong with getting yourself some stability so you can figure out how to ride the bike you're going to be riding for the rest of your life. And if that's what the GLP-1 is, cool. So, okay, still then, being on a GLP-1, even temporarily, can be aligned with the long-term vision of eventually one day no longer being on it, okay? So, same as I could have, this is where, again, everything is bio-individual, everything is a little bit nuanced, if not super fucking nuanced, but it's like the same way that I could say, okay, long-term, I don't want to be getting on the scale. And right now, in this moment, in order for me to feel the amount of safety that I have to, for me to function, I have to be getting on the scale, the amount that I am. But as I'm getting on the scale every day right now, I'm also working toward creating the safety that I need to release my dependency on the scale long term. Okay, so it's a similar thing where it's about knowing where you are in the long term, lifelong relationship you have with food and your body. So that's category number 2 of people, okay, where they're on a GLP-1, but the intention is for it to be temporary, and they know that, and so they're putting in other work to figure out those things that say, how did I get so, quote unquote, according to the BMI chart, overweight to begin with? What are some of the habits, patterns, stress relief, support? What are the things I need to do for my mind, body, soul system so that I feel equipped and empowered to drive the car that I was born into of my mind, body, soul system around food and around my body for the rest of my life? Okay, that's category number 2. Now, category number 3, aligned with the illusion that option 3 exists, are the category of people that I have seen that are in denial about the mismatch between their decision right now and their long-term goals. These are the people that say, I don't want to be on a GLP-1 for the rest of my life, and I'm going on it temporarily, and I still would like to pay no attention to my eating habits or how much I'm eating, when I'm eating, what I'm eating. I'm going on a GLP-1 because I don't want to deal with it, and I don't want to wake up to it, and I don't want to be aware of it. So I'll go on a GLP-1 and I'll lose the weight, and then I'll go off of it, and then I'll live happily ever after. And those are the people who I think are eventually at some point going to have a really rude awakening, because that framework, that belief system is rooted in denial, because it's the same as I'll go on this diet, I'll lose all the weight, and then that will be the end of the story. And we all know at this point, that is not at all the end of the story. That is when you gain the weight back plus some, which is, again, exactly what we're seeing with a lot of people who have gone on and off GLP-1s, is because here's the thing. the reason I say it doesn't do anything magical, even though, we are just at the very beginning of understanding what these drugs do, it not just around food and eating and appetite, but around the reward centers and the brain, so many things that we are discovering. So I'm not going to sit here and say it doesn't do anything magical. Fuck do I know about it. The truth, though, what I'm getting at here is that it's not the option 3 we think it is, because if you go off the GLP-1, your appetite comes back. That's the idea with an appetite suppressant. It comes back. And the whole thing with the food noise, if you don't learn how to deal with your relationship with food, the food noise comes back too. And so that's the thing I want to put on your radar, is not about good or bad, not about right or wrong, not about judging yourself for the decision that you're making to take one or not take one. That is not important to me. The idea here is, are your decisions, choices, and behaviors now that you're making today aligned with where you actually want to go? Because if they're not, if you're in that third category of people that are saying, I'm just going to go on a GLP-1 and then lose all the weight and then go off of it and have it all figured out, and the food noise won't come back and the weight won't come back and my appetite won't come back, those things won't happen. That is what I want you to pay attention to, because that's a lie to yourself, about yourself. And that, again, it's not about right or wrong. It's about, are you actually moving yourself in the direction that you want to move in? And importantly, as you can probably tell from what I'm saying, it's not about being on a GLP-1 or not. It's about the intention behind it, the way that you're using it, the energy around it. And I've seen that be so different for so many people. But it all really brings us back to the same point, that is, no one is coming. Okay? No one is coming. The same way no one was coming to save me and heal my relationship with food for me. I had to make those decisions and move through that discomfort over and over again because no one was coming. It's the same with a GLP-1. There's this illusion that the GLP-1 is the savior. And the whole point, like I said episodes ago, is it's not the exit you think it might be. It can be the path to the exit. It can quiet the volume of the flames around you down enough that you can find the exit yourself. But if you think the GLP-1 is the exit, that's something you want to pay attention to. So, that, okay? Whether you're on a GLP-1 or not, you still need to be clear that this is your responsibility and no one can do it for you. And that all comes back to, is what you're doing right now aligned with your long-term vision, values, goals? Okay, so like I said, I wanted to include that because it's aligned with what I'm talking about intentions and being clear on your intentions. But like I said at the end of the previous episode, I also have to say very much about food noise, but we're going to have to come back to that one. Okay, now, as part of this conversation with intentions, I want to read you a quote that I include in the coaching program just around this idea. So Zig Ziglar famously said, "You can't hit a target you cannot see, and you cannot see a target you do not have." And then, because the internet is AI at this point, the other closely related and equally famous variation of this concept is, if you aim at nothing, you will hit it every time. And I love that because it's saying this. You have to know where you're going, okay? And I'm going to... there's so many things. I want to, at some point later on in my notes, we're going to come back and talk about, this is why it can feel very vulnerable to have a goal, to have a vision, to have an idea of where you want to go. Because then you're invested in something. Then you care about something. That's vulnerable. And so very often the reason I'm putting it here is because, we like to think about what we need to do in the short term, especially if we're in like a survival mode. It's like, I just need to get the weight off. I just need to get the weight off. Like, I just need to be on the GLP-1. I just need to be on an appetite suppressant. I don't care. I just need to get the weight off. And being only aware of what needs to happen immediately right now without thinking about the long term. Where do you want to be a few years from now? What do you want your life to look like? Who's the person you want to be 5-10 years from now, right? that Matthew McConaughey clip. So if you are not willing to tell the truth about where you really want to go long term, right? It's not just about getting the weight off your body. It's about getting the weight off your body in a way that is sustainable. It's not just about getting the weight off your body. It's about getting the weight off your body in a way that feels safe, right? It's if we want to look more long term, part of what that requires is having the courage to actually claim, this is the target that I want to hit. This is where I want to go. Because if all you're doing is thinking about right here, right now, you might still be perpetuating a lot of the behaviors that you don't want to take with you moving forward. So you cannot hit a target that you cannot see. And you cannot see a target that you do not have. Some of the time it's about getting clear with yourself. What is it that you want? Who do you want to be? How do you want to feel long term? And then working your way there. Okay, now, all of that about intentions being said, here's the other thing I thought of that I think matters a lot. This goes back to, we've already talked about the power of your conscious input. So what is it that you're telling yourself? What's the story that you have in your own head about, the behaviors that maybe you're engaging in or why you're choosing what you're choosing, things like that. So first I want to tell you, a lot of this is, we've established, it's not about your first thought, it's about your second thought. It's not about your immediate reaction, it's about your follow-up immediate reaction. So I think about like the example that I gave when I was in the bathroom on the airplane, where it's like, first I look in the mirror, I'm immediately like objectifying my body, and then I wake up to that and I realize that. So the same thing happens, with our thoughts. And I had a moment recently that really stood out to me, like a moment of just awakening. When I say awakening, I mean like awareness. Because something happened, I don't remember what, and I heard myself say, it's always something. It's always something. Okay? If it's not this, it's something else. It's always something. And I heard myself say that in my mind, and then I thought, this is not a belief that I want anymore. I don't like this one. I don't want to hold on to this one. It's definitely something I heard growing up. It's always something. And if that's the lens through which I see the world, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. If I see the world through the lens of it's always something, then I will certainly find that. That will certainly be my experience because that's my bias. But so I noticed myself say that and I was like, I don't want to align with this anymore. Not because I think that's one where we could make the argument it's always something for sure. But that energy of, if this thing doesn't bog me down, something else will. If this isn't annoying, something else will be. If something, if this thing doesn't stress me out, this other thing will. I don't want to live my life like that. Okay. So that was my recent awakening moment. But the reason I'm thinking this and the reason I start there is because of how often I hear this come up, especially if we're doing something like intentional weight loss around, I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice. Now, I want you to examine that because I come back to what I'm calling finish the sentence game. Finish the sentence. Okay, so let's talk about I don't have a choice for a moment. So I have already shared with you the importance of remembering you do have a choice, because when you are in a position of choice, it means that it's not life or death. It means that it's not safety or danger. The presence of your choice is what signals safety. Okay, so that's why it's important. But here's what's interesting. If you are not clear on your long-term goal or vision, if you're not clear on your intention, why are you doing what you're doing? If you don't have a target, then you might be saying, I don't have a choice. I have to do this thing. And then it can feel really true because you're just, again, you're not connecting your present self with your future self. It can feel like I just have to do this thing because this is just what I have to do. And it can feel like you have no choice, and it can feel like you have no power, which doesn't feel safe and sustainable. Okay, but here's the thing. If you have a goal and a clear vision, and you know where you're headed and what you want, Then when you choose something like a behavior that makes you uncomfortable, which is part of it, and then you remind yourself, very often, here's how it goes, is I don't have a choice. I just have to. Well, okay, finish the sentence. Why is it that you don't have a choice? You don't have a choice for what? Well, here's how it goes. If I want to go where I want to go, I don't have a choice. If I want to have what I want to have, I don't have a choice. Okay? So it's not, I don't have choice or I have to do this thing because, period, that's it. That's the end of the sentence. The truth is, when you are connected to where you're going, when you have an intention, when there are your own values represented in the behavior that you're choosing, then you have a choice because this is you going where you want to go. This is totally optional. You don't have to go in this direction. It's yourself that wants to take you in this direction. Okay? So let's use again money. Money is a good example where if someone says, okay, my goal is to save a certain amount of money, okay, this year. And then someone proposes that they take a vacation. Okay? And they say, I can't take a vacation because I can't spend money. I don't have the money to spend. I don't have a choice. I can't go on this vacation. And it's like, okay, well, let's examine that. Can you? Can you actually? Well, sure, I could if I weren't saving for this other big thing. Oh, okay. So you do have a choice. Well, yeah, I have a choice. If I wanted to spend my money here, if I weren't saving, if I didn't have this goal, then I would be able to do it. But because I have this goal, I'm not able to do it. Okay. That's a very important distinction that your brain needs to have. There are so many examples I could give you about this, but if we're looking at something again, like intentional weight loss, and your goal is to, for example, create a calorie deficit, and then you choose behaviors and you make decisions that are aligned with that, if you start telling yourself, I don't have a choice, then it doesn't feel safe. But if you remember, you certainly have a choice and all of this is optional. You just don't have a choice if you have this goal and that's what you are, manifesting into reality. Those are two very different things. So if you are saying, I can't eat dessert. Again, just using this as an example. I can't eat dessert. I don't have a choice. I can't. Well, you don't have a choice for what? You don't have a choice if what you want is a calorie deficit? That's fair. That's true. Because if you choose to eat this dessert, for example, maybe that blows the calorie deficit. Maybe that puts you in a surplus. So in this instance, you don't have a choice. But does that mean that you actually literally don't have a choice, that you can't have dessert? Absolutely not. You can totally do it. But so this is why you need to know where you want to go long term and what you're doing in the short term, and the fact that you have all the choice, freedom, and permission in the world. Do it or don't do it. It's entirely up to you. And again, I think sometimes it's a lot easier to see these things when they're not about food. So it's like, I have to go to bed early. I don't have a choice. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, you do. You could stay up late. Yeah, I could stay up late, but not if I want to go to that event in the morning, first thing tomorrow. It's this or that. I just have to make choices. And so I have choice, but I'm not choosing to do the thing that maybe in this moment I want to. Or the example of, I have to stay in tonight and work on this project or study for this exam. I don't have a choice. I have an exam coming up. Well, you have a choice. You could blow it off. You could fail the test, but if you care about how you're performing or you care about the grade you get, then yeah, okay, you don't have a choice. You have to study. You have to prepare. So I think it's one of those things that is so habitual, especially around stuff like this, where we can be quick to say and feel, I don't have a choice. It's just what I have to do. And you want to be really clear. You are choosing to not have a choice. Okay? That's what it comes down to. You are choosing to put yourself in a situation where you don't have a choice. Which, okay, you got what I'm saying. Okay, now, for the last section of this episode, I'm going to move into a little bit of a different chapter of today. Because where I'm going with a lot of this is about the kind of anti-diet conditioning we need to unlearn so that we can relearn what is really going on when it comes to a lot of what we're going to have to do for something like intentional weight loss. Because as I'm having this conversation and I'm talking about it all the time with my clients and such, I'm seeing just how harmful and what an obstacle this messaging is when you're trying to do something like intentionally lose weight. And I think a lot of people struggle with it. So I'm going to say a few things. And as usual, I'm kind of planting seeds because I'm going to come back and say a lot more. But what I want to invite you to consider is, if you can relate to this, and if you have the experience of, when you think about being intentional about food or mindful of what you're eating, there's a voice in your head that says this is a diet and this is bad. Or, every time you think you want to maybe change what your body looks like, there's a part that comes in real hot and heavy and is like very judgmental of that. You shouldn't care what you look like, things like that. A lot of the messages that we've got. What I want to invite you to consider, inspired by a lot of the conversations I've been having with my one-on-one clients, is when you hear that voice, you shouldn't think that, you shouldn't want that, however it shows up for you. What I think is important to feel into is, what's the energy of that? How do you experience it? How does it feel for you to receive that voice? When it shows up, what happens for you? How do you notice your body react? How do you notice it feels energetically? How does it feel to you emotionally? And not just, you can look at this a couple ways or examine a couple of different things. Number one, what's the energy of that voice? So if that were a person that were speaking to you, what would be the energy of them, and or what's their emotion? Okay, so what are they feeling? But the other thing you could look at is, and this is really what I would pay attention to, is how does it feel for you on the receiving end of it? And so the reason I want to invite you to notice this is because this is a moment where, don't take my word for it. I don't think you ever want to just believe everything you hear, right? Or anything you hear. You really feel into, does it resonate for you? Does it feel true for you? Don't take my word on anything. If you're 36 episodes into this solo series with me, it's probably because it resonates with you. So the other thing I want you to pay attention to is, how does it actually feel? And for a lot of people, when I ask them this, it feels really judgmental. And it feels really shameful. And it feels kind of scary. And it creates a lot of fear and tension and contraction when that voice comes up. That is, don't think about that or don't feel that way. And how a lot of people experience it. This may not be true for you. That's why, again, feel into it. But how a lot of people experience it, definitely myself included, is that it feels really judgy. And so we have the judgment and the inadequacy and the shame of diet culture. But then we also have the judgment, the inadequacy, and the shame of anti-diet culture, which is exactly why, as you've heard me say, they can sound and look very different on the surface, but energetically are exactly the same for most people that I have worked with anyway. But where this takes me is another thing that I find fascinating. That is, again, go back to your childhood and just consider, even as an adult, I think a lot of us feel this way as an adult. I read something recently that was like, how mind-blowing it can be to realize that other adults can't punish you. or like that you can't just like be punished or like be in trouble, because I think a lot of us live with this feeling of always doing something wrong, never getting it right, always fearing being a failure, always, just living with that kind of story. And so, whether it was as a kid or still feels true as an adult, what I also invite you to pay attention to is if that rings true for you, if that's the story that you have around, yourself and how you show up in the world, that you can never do anything right. The reason I want to put it on your radar is because, to me, just bringing back this idea, we will always choose the familiar hell over the unfamiliar heaven. That's brain science. We will always choose the familiar hell over the unfamiliar heaven. Here's the thing with this. Even though we want so badly to be in a relationship with food that feels safe, loving, kind, conscious, intentional, we want that middle of the pendulum where I can be in relationship with my body and be in relationship with food in a way that feels safe, that is not driven by fear and judgment and shame. We could consider that the unfamiliar heaven. It sounds really nice, and we all want that. But if that's energetically unfamiliar, it will continue to be elusive. And so I think it's important to understand all of this on this energetic level, because if, again, you grew up with the story that you can't do anything right, that is fertile ground for diet culture to take hold, because that is an energetic match. And it also is the same place for anti-diet culture to come in. Because in both scenarios, you can't do anything right. You can never do it good enough. It's judgmental, it's shaming, and it's fear-based. And if that is your familiar hell, it is no wonder why diet culture sunk its claws in and quote-unquote worked on you. And it's also no wonder, to me, if you experience anti-diet culture this way, why anti-diet culture has also sunk its claws in. So now it's about just seeing all of that, and at the very least being able to acknowledge that actually these both sides are representing a familiar hell. And they're not actually that different because they feel the same in my body. And again, if that's not true for you, then that's not true for you. Throw it out. But I know that it's true for some people. And that's who I'm talking to. Okay, so all of that being said, the very last thing I want to leave you with today is a little bit anecdote, a little bit whatever. So I think what came to me as I was thinking about all of this is my ex-boyfriend. And I could say so much. And I have on the Patreon a bit, just about, I've been talking here a little bit about how this is all relational and attachment theory and things like that, and how the relationships that we have in our lives really can transform the way that we relate to ourselves. That's attachment. And one of the things that really stuck with me from my relationship was, okay, so we grew up together. We're both New Yorkers, and that's important because the kind of slang that I grew up with was the way that we would use the term OD. So OD as an overdose, but we would throw it around a lot. The kind of the way that kids these days might say, like, you're being so extra or something like that. Like you're having like a dramatic response to something. We would say like, you're ODing on it, or like that's OD or something like that. So anyway, so we grew up together. So we had this like shared language and understanding. And so one of the things that I love so much, and that I love so much that I got to take this with me beyond our relationship, is he saw me in so many ways. This is what I talked about on the Patreon a bit. He saw me so deeply. He always did. I mean, when we met in middle school and people used to be very intimidated by me and things like that, he was always like, you are so soft. Like, people have no idea. And he just always very deeply saw me. And one of the things that he really deeply saw in me, much before I found it in myself, was my innocence. And sometimes what would happen, I always just think of the example of like, this was true for a long, it honestly is still often true. If I pick up a crayon and I start coloring, especially as a kid, this would happen all the time because I was so full of rage. I would like pick up a crayon. As soon as I start coloring, I would break it. And it was so innocent. It wasn't on purpose. It was just that I kind of had this like energy overflow that felt a little out of control sometimes, and things like that would happen. But the reason I'm saying this is because his name was Adam. It's just easier to say that. So Adam and I would he would do this thing where I would show up and say, you know, either I did something too fast, or I did something too hard, or I did something too strong. And it reminds me of also, of Mice and Men, Lenny, right? That's the story. Lenny. Oh, sweet Lenny. I think this is it. It's been so long since I thought of this. But Lenny, who like loves, what is it, like a mouse or something? He has like this little animal that he just like loves, and then like by accident kills it. And I really related to that a lot, like as a kid growing up, because it was so innocent. It doesn't mean it's harmless. And that's a distinction I've made in my own self with, you know, setting boundaries and maintaining connection. Your behavior, it might be innocent, but it doesn't mean it's harmless. And so, yes, it causes harm, but it's so innocent, and we need to know that. And so anyway, I'm saying all this because I could really relate. I had a lot of moments like that where, in Adam's words, it was, I OD'd on it. I OD'd on it. And we would have these moments where, you know, I would maybe, I don't know why this is what I'm thinking, but like if I put too much like salt in a recipe or something, and he would just look at me and be like, did you OD on it? And I would be like, I OD'd on it. and sometimes I would just go to him and I would be like, I OD'd on it again. Like, I went too hard. Or even coming home from like a workout, like, I OD'd on it. I went a little too hard this time. Like, I shouldn't have done that, you know? And it was, but the reason I'm telling you this is because what it captured was, it's innocent. It doesn't mean it's harmless, but it's innocent. And this language that we had, and this practice we had of just kind of throwing it around that way of like, did you OD on it? Yeah, I did. And it's like, it's okay. It happens sometimes. You know, we all know how that feels. And so it's innocent. Okay. And so here's why I'm telling you all this, is that if you, like I, have the story that you can't do anything right and everything you do is wrong without even knowing it, it's almost like carrying around this energy of fear and judgment, guilt and shame, without maybe even knowing, you know, where it comes from or what the origin is. But again, it's the familiar hell. It's what we know, to see ourselves as guilty. I did something bad. I did something wrong. I am the problem. It's what we know. Even again, if it wasn't intentional or wasn't on purpose, whatever. If it's familiar, it's familiar. And so that, again, I think is where diet culture, anti-diet culture, it's got a place to go. It's a match. And it's an energetic match. But what I want to propose to you, if what you want is the unfamiliar heaven of the middle of the pendulum, is that you are innocent. You are innocent. It doesn't mean that all of your behaviors are harmless. Sometimes you can be innocent and causing harm at the same time. I'm going to say a little bit about that. But it is important, just like I said last time, that you understand your intention. You understand where you're coming from. You understand that sometimes when you go a little too hard, you can look at yourself and say, so you OD'd on it. Okay. It's innocent. It's innocent. Okay. So what I want to, again, just propose to you, what I want you to walk away with is, what if, just try it on. What if you weren't guilty? What if you were innocent? What then? And how would that maybe shift, challenge, change your relationship with something like diet culture or anti-diet culture. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. That's for you to figure out and feel into this week. But that's what I want to put here is instead of the familiar hell that you're innocent, what if you just consider the unfamiliar heaven for a second that you're innocent? Because I do think that again, it's not about diet culture, anti-diet culture. It's about the energy. And I brought this up so many episodes ago. It's not just we accept the love we think we deserve. We accept the love we feel safe to receive. And if you don't feel safe because it's so unfamiliar, if you don't feel safe to see yourself as innocent, if you don't feel safe to hold a paradigm of belief rooted in your pure innocence, you're not going to have that. You're not going to connect with that. But one of the things that stands out to me so much when I look back on my own story and my own experience was at the end of my weight loss, when I started gaining all the weight back, I heard the story of, I have no willpower and I'm not disciplined and it's all my fault and I'm the problem and all the things that we hear when we gain the weight back after weight loss. For me, what was different is I didn't believe that. I did not believe I was the problem. I did not believe that I was doing everything wrong. I just didn't believe it. It made me very curious. How is it that I just lost all this weight and now I'm gaining all this weight? I don't know. I know that I'm not the problem. I know I'm not doing anything wrong. So I started researching. But that's the whole idea is the belief of diet culture was not a match for the energy in my body. It didn't have a place to land. So you have to know you're innocent. And I think that's the foundation of a lot of it, because a lot of us do not believe that, because a lot of us were not told or taught that. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to say about it, because I have to go and there's so much more I want to say, is this comes back to, the very beginning of the solo series where I'm talking to you about how you have superpowers. Whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not, you have superpowers. You have an intuition, you have psychic abilities. So it comes back to, again, as I've shared with a coach, a mentor of mine who one day sat me down and was like, it's kind of like superpowers, right? When you're a kid and you have superpowers, there's a lot of stories about this. They are a little out of control. So, of course, I asked the internet. I was like, give me some good examples of this. Because what I always think about, obviously, is Harry Potter. But I think there are better examples. The vision I always get is like when he's trying the different wands and he like flicks a wand and it like explodes and like a lamp shatters, or a vase or something like shatters. And it's like, it's examples like that where it's like, he's innocent. He didn't do it on purpose. It's innocent, but also he doesn't know how to use his powers yet. And that's what happens. And so if we want to long term, not just heal the relationship with food, but really get in touch with ourselves intuitively and the psychic abilities and powers that come with that. This is where, for me, it all comes together. So I asked the internet, I was like, give me some good examples of, how this shows up in, for example, superhero movies. I imagine it has to. So here's something, I'm just going to read it. It's describing a child with an extraordinary gift that they don't yet know how to regulate, whose, quote, problem isn't the power itself. It's the lack of understanding, guidance, and safety. Here are some of the best examples. Frozen, of course. I have to go back and watch Frozen again. Frozen, this is probably the closest metaphor. Young Elsa accidentally strikes Anna with her ice powers while they're playing. The family responds with fear and concealment rather than teaching her how to use them. Elsa grows up believing her power is dangerous instead of learning to regulate it. Conceal, don't feel is essentially a trauma response. Okay, another one I love. This is another good one. One of the best movies, The Incredibles. Jack, the little baby in The Incredibles. Jack has incredible powers but no idea how they work. He unintentionally sets himself on fire, shoots lasers, turns into metal, etc. It's chaotic, but he's not bad. He's just an infant with abilities beyond his developmental capacity. Now, there are a bunch of others. I'm not going to get into all of it, but I love this. He's just an infant with abilities beyond his developmental capacity. So good. And I think very true for a lot of us. Now, I'm going to keep reading some things. It says, if you're looking for the metaphor itself, Elsa as the strongest analogy, not because she's dangerous, but because the story says this child has something incredibly powerful inside her. She accidentally hurts someone she loves because no one has taught her what this power is or how to work with it. The tragedy isn't that she has ice powers. The tragedy is that everyone concludes the power is bad. Instead of, she needs help learning how to use it. Another scene that comes to mind, especially poignant, is Spider-Man. Peter Parker first develops his powers and accidentally breaks things, sticks to objects, hurts people without meaning to. The story isn't about him becoming less powerful. It's about learning responsibility, regulation, and intentional use of what he already has. Okay, so the reason I am leaving you with all of this is because, yes, I do think that you are a superhero. I think we all are. I do think that we all have superpowers. And in order for us to make sense of how to use our power, first we have to understand that our power is safe. It's not the power being bad. It's that we didn't know how to use it. And sometimes all of our power, we OD'd on it. We just OD'd with our power because we didn't know. And we caused harm and we hurt other people or we hurt ourselves, especially when it comes to something like intentional weight loss. But what I'm saying to you is, when it comes to these things, you want to start to see the innocence. It doesn't mean it was harmless, but it does mean that it was innocent. And if you can acknowledge that, there is an opening for the unfamiliar heaven. If you can see the part of you that dieted too extreme, the part of you that had an eating disorder behavior or tendency, if you can see that they are innocent, you are innocent. It doesn't mean, again, that it's not your responsibility or that it didn't hurt you. Yes, we can again acknowledge all of that is true. The consequences are real. But if we look at also the intention, right? All these superhero babies, they didn't mean to hurt people. What they needed was to be seen as innocent so that they could be taught, here's how to use your power. So essentially, I guess, that's what I'm doing. I'm here to see you and say, you're innocent. And if what you want is to be able to use your power in a way that is safe, it begins with you understanding that. It begins with you understanding you are innocent. You are not guilty. Okay? It is your responsibility. Yes, but it's not your fault. It's not your fault. So that is where I'm going to leave you. And just consider, go back into marination and contemplation. What would it mean if I really were innocent? What would I mean? What would it mean for me if I were well-intentioned and I just didn't know any better and I was just doing my best, right? When I think about my own weight loss, I was just doing what everyone told me to do. And that's probably true for a lot of you too, when it comes to extreme dieting or an eating disorder. I just thought that this was what I needed. I just thought that I was doing my best. I didn't know. It's innocent. It's innocent. And I think we really have to start there. So that's where I'm going to leave you. I love you. I love you so much. Thank you for being here, as always. If anyone in your life needs to hear this, please share this pod, rate, review, subscribe, all the things. And I will come back and I will see you next week. Mwah!